and welcome back to Prosecco and Plot Twists with myself, Sheila, and Christina. Cheers, my dear. We're going to have a little Prosecco. And just to remind you that if you are joining in with a little glass of Prosecco, to drink responsibly. Well, we have read The Teacher by Freida McFadden, and what a read. My goodness me. It's such a contradiction of a book because it's dealing with the darkest, most duplicitous of crimes and of actions, but at the same time, you can't put it down. You're just reading it, consuming it nonstop. And the thing about her books, I've read a few of them, is they're so easy to consume. They really are.
Yeah, I think it took me like a day just to get through that.
And it was the type of book that you couldn't put down. You didn't want to put down, because every page, every chapter that you turn to, you're like, my goodness, where is this going? Now, a couple of wee things that I really want to talk about. So just to outline the plot, the premise, it's obviously about the teacher, Mr. All-American Nate, who on the surface is this great, very benevolent, very engaging, charismatic teacher, an English teacher of all things. That just adds insult to injury for me. And he is married to Eve, who is a maths teacher, and they do say that opposites attract. Okay, English and maths, definitely. Maths wouldn't be my forte. I don't know about you, Christina.
English is my thing.
And over the course, so we find out from the first chapter that they're married, that they work in the same school, in Casem High School, but you know that there's something not quite right.
Yes.
From the get-go, and you're automatically, McFadden tunes you into a number of things. So in terms of Nate, she wants you to like him. She wants you to kind of be taken in by his appearance. And Eve comes across through her internal monologue, I think, as being quite almost snippy initially.
I think that she definitely isn't painted as a likable character, so that whenever the ending comes, it really does impact us.
Absolutely. You know? And I think the reason that she kind of sets these two key characters up like that from the get-go is because she wants us to really consider how we stereotype and how we judge people in these initial first impressions. Yeah. Because when you go through the book, you find out that this particular teacher ain't a good one. And that's not a critique of his skill in the classroom.
You do, well, don't you? It all seems to unravel.
There's something about his whole demeanor, that he's too good to be true. But because he's so skilled at fooling people, McFadden drops in lots of little clues. And in the first chapter, I don't know if you picked up on this, whenever you're getting through, she's talking us through the mundane. It's a really mundane exposition
of their teeth brushing and all.
Yes, with the teeth brushing, and he's in there obviously getting ready, brushing his teeth, humming a song. I think it was Elvis All Shook Up or something. And she's saying that this really grates on her. She's getting dressed, and McFadden goes into the detail of her white buttoned up to the neck blouse and her tan skirt. So you're initially thinking that she's quite repressed or quite uptight, as well as being a little bit moody, and that's contrasted against this really easygoing, easy on the eye, highly attractive,
charismatic.
He's a morning person. If you're humming when you're brushing your teeth, definitely. So he does. He's certainly, the optics there. You're like, what is her problem here? Yeah. Why does she have such a reaction to her husband going about his morning ablutions? It's such an extreme reaction.
Yeah.
And yet, what I think is McFadden wants us to really judge, to inspect our own stereotypes, and she sets us up to kind of follow these characters as they go about their day and they make their way into work and they start interacting. And then suddenly she drops in these little clues.
Yeah.
You know, and the first clue is always in retrospect. That's what the way this novel reads for me structurally. She takes you so far. Something really mundane and innocuous happens. You move on a little bit further in the plot. And in retrospect, all of those little mundane things take on a deeper meaning.
Yeah.
And you're thinking, what are you talking about?
No, I was actually considering that. And I'm thinking, so you were talking about nearly how we're set up to dislike Eve. And in the same way, we're also set up to not trust Addie completely. Do you think maybe she was making a comment on, do you know, like that victim blaming mentality where...
Could, absolutely. There's so many layers to this that when Addie's obviously, we'll talk about the narrative voice. You know, I love narrative voice. That's my thing.
Her shtick.
That's my shtick. I love the narrative voice, and there's a lot. I have a lot to say about the narrative voice here, so we can come back to that. But I do agree with you. But the point that I was making about these little nondescript things, it kind of ties in with the themes, and she does it. She brings you into it so subtly, so quickly.
Yeah.
Did you pick up? Maybe I picked up on this because I'm uber into shoes. The shoe thing in the opening chapter with Eve as she slipped her feet into the Jimmy Choos, the stiletto Jimmy Choos. I'm like, oh my God.
I just thought, I was like, I know a woman who can relate to this.
Me, absolutely. I'm like, yep. So I was hooked by that from the get-go. But it was his reaction to her getting dressed and coming out, and the silence, that silent criticism nearly.
It was uncomfortable.
It was pointed.
Yeah.
And, you know, the fact that she's saying to you, you know, I have such a great husband. When he's annoyed, he doesn't get angry. You know, he doesn't create a scene. He just lets me know that he's quietly disappointed. So from that, in hindsight, retrospectively, you're being sucked in. You can see how she's being slowly controlled. And that theme
she's
of
treated like a child.
Coercion
Yeah.
and suggestion and that power comes into it. And it's all played out through the fact that she has to hide her purchases from her shoes and her shopping. He controls her money.
Yeah.
You know, and all of that information is thrown at you, and you're...
I feel like at the start with that information, it's hard to, you know, nearly discern what's actually happening in the relationship, because McFadden does do such a good job of painting Eve out to be this.
Because you're thinking, well, why is she automatically, she's spending, obviously, my initial reaction was she's spending money foolishly. He is, you know, he's having to take control to kind of...
He's the mature one in the relationship.
Yeah. And that's the way that you're kind of set up in that initial expose of the chapter in terms of the dynamic of their relationship, until that moment where we have, you know, where she brings in his smiling eyes and the fact that they weren't smiling. Whenever they bumped into each other in the canteen, he had all of the faculty, the other teaching colleagues, fawning over him. There was a new, can't remember if it was a substitute teacher or a student teacher.
But she was all over him.
And, you know, it was all the touchy-feely, and he had switched on the charm. And when Eve came over, she clearly was staking a claim. You know, which automatically tells you that there's something not quite right in the relationship. So there was marital disharmony. But then McFadden just takes it down another layer, and she says, you know, that Eve knew his tells, that whilst he was playing up for his audience, she could tell by his eyes that he was annoyed because the smile didn't reach his eyes. And I got chills when I read that.
You're like, oh, there's something not right with this man.
Eyes are the window to the soul. And, you know, she, you know, that really, really came in there very powerfully for me. Would you agree? Was there anything in the opening that kind of stuck out for you in that, the dynamic of the two characters?
No, I did. She did lead me to believe that Eve was like a complete biatch, you know, like the way she behaved and stuff around him, which I think that was her intention the whole time, you know, let's paint this woman as a villain, and then whenever it's all revealed we'll be like, what, you know. But he did annoy me at the start because I was thinking, if I got up and somebody's singing, brushing their teeth, or humming, brushing their teeth, I'm going to be ready to take someone out.
What the people watching don't know is that the blood Fullertons are not morning people. I myself am a breath of fresh air in the morning time. Well, that's my perception, and I'm sticking
now
to
that
it.
all the kids are out of the house, maybe.
Absolutely. But yeah, I can kind of get that. But what I was going to say is, so if we look at the structure of the text, the prologue, the exposition, and the burial that's happening there, and this character's talking through about burying someone, automatically you're set up to think, oh, she's killed her husband and he's been buried there. So it's all of these little subtle things.
I know,
So McFadden, I think, is really, so she deals with this theme of coercion, and she shows how skilled Nate is at it by kind of coercing the reader in the way that she wants them to go until she is ready to reveal the plot twist and the dynamic.
And you know, I'm just thinking there, a lot of times whenever you read these books, it's nearly not romanticized, but it's not as uncomfortable as it should be. And she never strays away from making the reader feel uncomfortable. You know, the whole way through it, you feel disgusted. Even the way that we're roped into it, you feel complicit.
But do you know what I think? So I completely agree with that. Do you know what I think is so brilliant about the way she does that? She doesn't paint any gory details. She makes our mind do all
your imagination, and it's like
the dirty work, and you're cringing.
Yeah, like I mean, reading it, like again, you can't put it down. But I felt absolutely disgusting, and it. Do you know that feeling when your stomach's dropping and you just know something bad's happening? It was that constant feeling, you know, from really Addie's introduced, and
I think again when you're saying that, she wants that feeling that she provokes in the reader is the feeling that Addie, the other character, and we'll explain who Addie is obviously feeling as this young girl, this young student. So Addie is she's a very vulnerable girl, and has had a very difficult upbringing and situation. And there's a little subplot that has kind of been revealed as well as at the start, which you mentioned earlier on, Addie being unreliable. So she is an unreliable narrator and an unreliable in terms of her perspective. However, that doesn't negate the fact that she has been very badly abused and taken advantage of.
The thing is, so just a wee bit of context behind this, there was a teacher who perhaps became overly close to Addie, you know, given her circumstances.
So just to explain there, so you have Art, who was giving, was it help in maths?
He was helping her, but
he was giving her extra tuition. He was a teacher at the school. He has been suspended.
But he was also inviting her family to dinner and stuff. And
so he was suspended because he was a truly genuine teacher, a truly genuine person who really had a vocation to teach and to help children achieve their full potential. However, the contrast that McFadden has set up between Nate, who is this all round good looking, charismatic young teacher, you have contrasted against that Art, who was slightly overweight,
not attractive.
I pictured him bald for some reason. I don't know if that fact has been in there.
I pictured him as the Penguin or the Batman.
Not that has any commentary on bald men, but he wasn't attractive, and even though he did everything by the book, he brought her over to his house when his wife was there with her own mother, and it was all above board. But because Addie had I think she had done something silly, like she had gone to his house and hid in the bushes and ran away, and then there was all of these aspersions were cast over Art. And
I don't think she ever
no, she
accused
made
him.
no accusation, but when she was asked a question, she was ambiguous in her answer because she says, well, I couldn't say no because he had touched me on the shoulder or something like that, and that was enough. And he was cast
Lost
to the
his job.
lost his job. He was lost his reputation, lost his livelihood.
And I think for Eve, this is where a lot of her hate towards Addie comes from as well, because she had a very positive relationship with Art.
She had a really good relationship with Art. However, I would say that what you've talked there about Eve, it goes much deeper in terms of her feelings. And I think she maybe used that as a screen.
Are you talking about the end and all?
Yes.
Whenever we that big reveal.
So we'll get to that in a minute. So I do think that she deflected and she was able to say, well, that's why whenever she was having conversations with her colleagues, well, look what she did to Art. Because if there was anything else, that would have been a normal, you and I are both teachers, that would have been kind of a normal, reaction to seeing a colleague being falsely accused of something, or not even anything sexual, but to be manipulated in a way that was untrue and unfair. So you would have that reaction, whether it was pupil or staff member or whatever. So I find that very, very believable. But Addie, this vulnerable young girl, is taken under the wing of Mr. Bennett, and she is obviously an easy target.
Yes.
And that's when things start to, that feeling in the pit of your tummy and that kind of emotional roller coaster. I think it's on a parallel with how Addie herself would have been feeling at that time.
Yeah, I feel like whenever you're a teenage girl, and it's kind of like I get all these videos on my TikTok, and it's like me and my tankini strutting about, hoping that the 25-year-old lifeguard will fancy me, like that sort of thing. Young girls, they fancy other,
but that's all part and parcel of growing up.
But the danger is when somebody
when there's a predator.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think for Addie, I don't think she did anything wrong. She was a child.
No, he is in the position of responsibility. He's in loco parentis. Yeah. And for me, as a human being in the first level, as a parent and as a teacher, to see someone who is put in that position of trust and that position of responsibility completely exploit that.
I think it's because I work with young people and I am a teacher that I'm like, that's what made it so uncomfortable, because I was like, how does someone's brain even go
and I
there?
think that was something that she really did phenomenally well, was show how, because thankfully 99.9% of people on the planet are decent people and are not evil in the way that this character is. She showed how someone with that mindset and that intention can exploit opportunities that the likes of you and I wouldn't even be aware of.
Yeah.
And the fact that he lured her in by the way of, assisting her, allowing her to say negative things about his wife, Mrs. Bennett. Bringing her down because she was isolated from the rest of the student body because of what had happened, the incident that was slowly revealed to you going through. She didn't have any friends to confide in. She had lost her best friend, Hudson, who will also become really significant. And the skill, the fact is, McFadden here has you on this roller coaster, and I nearly feel that
you feel like you're nearly
bouncing from one
dots,
thing to the other. So Hudson, remember that name, because as you're going along and you see the interactions between Addie and Hudson with Kenzie, the other female character, who again is, she's the popular girl, she's the beautiful girl, and you're thinking that that's just a normal teenage dynamic of, young girls maybe being jealous or not liking other, or, all of that kind of growing up thing that you would think that with a wee bit of maturity should, they should grow out of. But Hudson is he's just there in the background, and there's nothing really overly striking about his significance until that plot twist at the end, and you're like, oh my God.
I think the thing that Freida McFadden does really well is the plot twist, because you have a huge plot twist with Eve. Are we allowed to?
Well, so we'll finish our Addie and then we'll go on to Eve.
Oh no, but I just like she gets you in with one plot twist, and like you are near the end, like you're like that much of the book left, and then all of a sudden, last page, bam, and your jaw is on the floor. Because you can't think it gets any worse.
And then the whole way you're going, how? Like, what?
Yeah.
It's just...
you know what? I was doing mental gymnastics because I had figured out the Eve stuff.
I'm so proud of you.
I didn't figure out the other one.
Oh, right, okay.
Because I wasn't expecting to be caught off guard twice.
Okay, but that's what she does so well here.
Thing.
And it's just like she hits you one side and then she comes back and you don't see the other side coming. But she's so brilliant. So when Addie is being lured in, and you're thinking, so I'm thinking as a teacher,
where's the pastoral care?
Where's the pastoral care? Number one. Number two, he's an English teacher. And even with that responsibility, in terms of workload, and we're speaking as English teachers here.
Oh, I didn't believe it for a second.
So we know
he had a lot of time on his hands.
But the fact even that he, in terms of the extracurricular activity, that he would have so much time at such odd hours, because it was going on into stupid o'clock at night. And yes, I know it's set in an American school context, which probably is slightly different in terms of their timings, but I don't think that the system is any different in terms of what we would have here.
I would say safeguarding and all with kids
absolutely
is probably the same child protection issues,
whole
keeping
thing.
Yourself right as a grown-up with a minor, things like that.
As the child. But the fact that he was there maybe to 7 or 8 at night.
You wouldn't see me doing it.
No, because you try to have some kind of life outside of that, but you soon realise why he was doing that because of his life. Yeah. That's the thing. And then the dark room, that for me was quite scary.
Yeah, and
not because it was a dark room, but because
she's afraid of the dark.
I'm not afraid of the dark.
Perpetually.
The reason for me that it was quite scary is because how, in a school context, if you think that he was able to manipulate maybe a part of a school building that wasn't as frequented to, I don't know how I can say this in a nice way.
Nefarious deeds, and it was not
with this.
Yeah, it was very dark. Yeah,
15-year-old girl, 14-year-old girl, to have intimate relations with her on school property, to continue to groom and coerce her. Right, and that goes right up until the end. And what we find out, the thing for me, my first jaw-dropping moment, and apologies if you haven't read this book, but honestly, even with what we're giving away, we're not doing it justice. Yeah, read it.
You'll still be disgusted and caught off guard.
I started my red flag, so my brain was just red flags the whole way through, but there was this really big red flag that kind of rose out above the top when Eve found out about them. I thought that was really strange that she had taken a picture of it. She had said, "This is what I know you're doing," because initially we thought that the disharmony and the dysfunctionality of their relationship was because he was having an affair. We knew that she was having an affair, so there was obviously a breakdown in the relationship. But then we find out that he's actually a paedophile. For want of a better word. And that's like, that word is never used in the text.
It's in your brain the whole
but
time.
it is in there.
Yeah.
You can't escape that. It's you know, your own internal monologue is screaming, you know, how
Yeah.
can this go on? And she, instead of going to the police, she says, look, you're leaving, we're getting divorced, this is it.
Yeah.
I'm like, what part of your brain, either as, so if you found out, let's take it step by step, your husband was doing something like that,
Oh, you'd be straight to the
police.
Yeah.
Let's find out that a colleague was doing something like that, you're straight to the police. You know, you're informing the authorities, you're getting this sorted. You're not saying, look, I'm out of here. So for me, that was a red flag.
Absolutely. And I think that's whenever you started questioning Eve and who is she? What is her background? You know, because no normal person in their right mind behaves like that or thinks like that.
That is when I think that's the moment when McFadden wanted you to understand the narrative voice.
Yeah.
Because when you're reading the narrative voice, and this was something that I had said to you as we were reading it, that you had to, I found myself having to go back to the start of the chapter to find out who was speaking, because the narrative voice read the same the whole way through. There was no distinctive, you know, person or character to it. And I found that hard to grapple with. It didn't put me off reading it. You know, whilst I found it hard, it was kind of drawing me in further, because I've read enough books to know that there's a reason for it. I've read enough of McFadden's books to know that this is a deliberate ploy on the part of the author. And it was at that moment that I was like, haha, this huge big red flag. I have it worked out. I know what's going on. I knew what was going on, but it really confirmed it, that Eve was his first victim.
Yeah, because Eve's voice does read quite juvenile, you know. And
her whole behaviour and that, like, she was a victim of grooming, of paedophilia. She was Nate's first victim. She continues to be a victim as an adult through coercion, control and abuse, because he abuses his power over her.
He still has that power. Yeah.
And the fact that he uses sexual intimacy to manipulate and control her as well, I felt really uncomfortable with. So
but you can see he still has the same mindset for her as he would for Addie.
Yes.
You know, like,
and that's why I think that when you get to that point, and it's roughly about the midway point in the text, you're like, oh my God. And then you're thinking back, that's why that scene in the morning time reads the way it does. And then that's when your shift in your mindset, and you're like, the beep, you know, and your sympathies automatically go to Eve. And you're like, okay, now I understand the repressed, buttoned up, the need for that. She's trying, you know, the metaphor of the shoes and the motif of the shoes for me took on a deeper meaning there beyond the Jimmy Choo and all the rest. But that's the only thing that she can control. And it's the only way that she can defy him.
Yes.
It's the only way that she can express some kind of personality. It's that kind
outside of him,
And even when we think back to her shoplifting, you know, and stealing the shoes or attempting to steal the shoes, it all makes sense. Now, that's the point where you think that ordinarily it would be over.
Do we need to talk about her affair first?
We're going to talk about everything, because from this point onwards, the pace of the plot just... And the plot twists just keep coming and coming and coming. So... we have completely shifted. Nate makes us uncomfortable. Eve, we feel an immense sympathy for. Addie, our hearts are going out to. We then find out.
No, we have to do context first.
Okay.
So Eve,
I'll let you take over. I'm too riled up.
No, this
at
is because
stage.
I didn't see this coming. Is this the last plot twist? Right. Eve's having an affair with this fella called Jay, and he works in the shoe store. And I'm a complete girl's girl. When Nate was being all weird with money, I was like, you go, girl, get your man. And I was all like, oh, this is so sad, because Jay has a wife and a baby at home, and He
I'm
didn't.
just going to intrude here yet again. We argued about what she's going to say.
Yes,
and I also want to point out,
I did reread.
I was right.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So, this is just. It just shows how subtle Freida McFadden
power
is.
of
She
coercion.
does not have to
She sows
say
the
it.
seeds. Yep.
You just assume it. And because I could have swore it was like one of those Mandela effects. I was like, no, she did write that his wife was at home with the baby. And I was like, oh, but she didn't. It was like, so she referred to the woman as she, so there was no specific title. And the baby was at home. What time will you be home at? And he didn't want to say I love you to her. And I was like, oh, this is so sad because she's a homewrecker now. That's all I was thinking. But then dun, get to the end. Hudson, don't.
Jay
On the
Hudson
last page.
are the same person. So we had a row. Not that we ever have them often.
This was quite a row, though it was.
And I said, she argued with me, and I said, Christina, she doesn't. And we went back to the text, and you realised that, as per usual, your mum is right.
But that was the thing, like the whole way through, it was the same with
but that was the power
stuff.
The power of suggestion.
She didn't have to spell that out for us. Our brains were doing it.
That's what I mean. She takes you right there, and you fill in the gaps. And I think that
I thought whenever I found out about Eve being the first victim and all the events that happened after that, that action, like I was like that, but my jaw
hit the ground,
hit the floor, and it didn't come up for a long time.
I think that that's a really important point, because we now understand that, and this is where she has been so clever about this, because she's shown that cycle of abuse in so many levels and layers, because you have Nate with Eve,
just gonna keep
with the
doing
first victim. We know that Kenzie and
potentially
Addie
Lotus
were victims. We know that potentially Lotus, and now we see this fact that Eve, who is a victim of abuse, has gone on to perpetuate that in her relationship with Jay.
My hope is, because it all seems so positive for Addie at the end, my hope is that because she managed to escape Nate, I just hope that she doesn't go on like this isn't a prophecy.
But do you see, whenever, and again, this is a big spoiler alert as well, you see at the end of the text when Addie is being manipulated by Nate to kill Eve.
Yeah.
Okay. And that power of suggestion.
Oh, is this the phone call and all?
Yes. And I think that the power of suggestion that McFadden has led us through enables us to show or to experience how powerful that was for Addie. Nate's reach over Addie was. Otherwise, we would be kind of thinking, it wouldn't have worked. But it was so powerful.
Yeah.
She was so vulnerable.
Oh, because she thought, I'm going to get in trouble. This is all my fault. Not that this man who has a position of power over me has manipulated me into feeling certain ways and doing certain things, but as a child, you don't. As if a grown up tells you you're going to get in trouble, you're going to get in trouble.
You listen.
But then even I was thinking about, do you know whenever all said and done, Addie rings Hudson to come and lift her, and then Eve rings Jay. And I didn't even clock that.
Same person.
Yeah. And, but again, it's sort of all laid out for you there. You just have to be
to piece it all together.
And honestly, because my brain, my brain couldn't do anymore. It was on overdrive. I was like, isn't that so cool how they both have someone close to them that they can just ring on a whim? Oh, I was meant to ask, just what did you think about, do you know at the end, whenever all the shoes were sort of left out and there was the shoe and the raven and stuff, what did you make of that?
I think that was, again, creative license. And I do think that it added to the intensity of it and the drama.
Yes.
And for me as a reader, the way you say, you said before that you kind of see wee pictures in your, like a movie reel in your head when you're reading your books. I think for me, that heightened the drama and the tension of it. And I really liked that. It was like that kind of, oh my God, I was nearly looking around me to see where is she? You know, it was that when the shoes were there.
It was nearly like this sort of apparition that was coming.
But thoroughly enjoyed it. You must read this book. It's one of those texts that
You're on the
you
edge
start
of your
reading
seat
it,
the
you're
whole
on the
time.
edge of your seat. And the contradiction of it is, even though it's full of all these dark themes, it is something that you would want to take away on holiday with you.
It's so easy.
It's such, and
all the chapters are so short and you just flick through them.
It is absolutely brilliant. So,
though I think it would be one if I was to do a reread. I would have to wait a wee while because it makes you feel you're in the pits of despair.
But when
you're staring at a wall afterwards,
when you would read it again, I think it would be even more clever. So hats off to Freida McFadden. She did an absolutely superb job, and you should read this. Absolutely. 5 out of 5 stars from me. And that's even with our teaching background. And just on a note, and just on a wee side note before we finish, what do you think of the poem that he wrote?
That was awful.
Critiquing it as an English teacher.
I spoke in my mouth. I was like, ugh. And the fact that he couldn't even come up with a new poem every time, he just recycled the same trash.
The same poem all the time. It was
too much.
It was not good.
Too much.
But again, that it shows that how,
not all English teachers are pretentious.
No.
In fact, most of them aren't.
And the other thing that I would say, just from a practical perspective, as an English teacher, the volume of marking that you have, you don't have the time to be involved in, well, certainly I don't, because I'm in the books and in the
whenever
on the
Eve
battleground
was coming home with all the maths marking and Nate had nothing, I was like, something's not adding up here. Pardon the pun.
1 plus 1. Okay, it just didn't work for you.
It did not work.
Yeah. But on that note, phenomenal read, enjoy it. And just to kind of signpost what's coming in the next episode, we are going to be reviewing The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides, another phenomenal page turner. And we're already knee deep in it as well and loving it. So tune in for the next episode of Prosecco and Plot Twists. Until then, cheers.